Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another Wildwoods Beekeeping Chat. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And tonight we have a special guest, Dr. Cameron Jack. And thank you, Cameron, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And before we get into some questions and topics, from the chat, I was wondering if you could real quick just introduce yourself to everybody here. If they, some people may not know you, just tell us a little bit about you and kind of what you do.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for inviting me, Grayson. I appreciate it. I just love talking bees, so happy to do it. So a little bit about me. I am originally from a small town in southern Nevada. That's just about an hour outside of Las Vegas. And I grew up kind of, I guess, not really that interested in bees. Well, my grandpa was a beekeeper, so I mean, I kind of grew up around bees, but it was just kind of like a weird thing that my family did. When I was in college, I kind of started getting back into it a little bit. My cousin took over my grandpa's bees and kind of was doing more at the time, and then I knew that I liked science. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, right? I just knew that I liked science, and so I kind of just tried. I just thought, what if I could combine science and bees, right? And I just thought I'd try it out for a little bit, and I found a place at Oregon State University working with Dr. Ramesh Sagili, who gave me my first shot, I guess, at science and bees. And then pretty soon I was hooked, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. So then after 2 years of working at Oregon State, I went and did my PhD with Jamie Ellis at the University of Florida, and ended up able to get a job there, which is exciting. So I've been teaching at the University of Florida for 6 years and doing my research primarily on varroa control, but we also do a lot of work on other honeybee pests and diseases and pesticides, and basically anything that kills bees, I want to know about it. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's always, interesting about science. I've talked about this in my beekeeping chats with a lot of other folks. It's always good to follow science. I like to follow science too. It's really interesting. And when we're talking about varroa mites and stuff, I really do got a treat here soon. Tell us a little bit about mites. I know you focus primarily on trying to help bees, with varroa mites and all this stuff. Tell us a little bit about varroa mites and kind of some things that you teach your people at Florida, where you work at. A little bit about that, if you could, real quick.
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of considered this for a long time, and so I didn't say this, but when I was at Oregon State doing my master's, I wasn't doing work with mites. I was doing work with honeybee gut pathogen called Nosema cerana. So a lot of listeners will know about that. But I kind of decided there, that I needed to probably focus on mites, because I'd go to bee meetings and people would just ask me, I'd present my research on Nosema, and then everybody would ask me about mites. And I was like, all right, well, what am I doing here? Why don't I go learn about mites and study that so I can try to help people, right? And so, I've a lot of my focus area has been using chemicals to control, although we've done a lot with like some non-chemical controls as well. I think the most important thing that I'd want people to know and really walk away from is that I feel that it's very important to actually know what your mite numbers are, right? If you I think human beings, we're bad at guessing. We're bad at estimating, right? Like you might pull up a frame and look and be like, I don't see any mites. It looks fine. Like it's all good. Well, truth is those mites are good at hiding, right? Like they're good at not being seen. So, it's one of those things where if I could tell people anything, it'd be like, know your mite numbers, right? Like it's a little intimidating for people that are just starting out in beekeeping and to think about collecting bees in a jar and shaking them up and whatever, like that just seems intimidating. But it's one of those things where it's just I consider it just a base level beekeeping skill now. Like you need to know how to count your mites, and then once you do count your mites and you realize that you've got lots of mites in there, you got to do something. And it's usually something I've learned is that it's usually easier to keep them low than it is to try to recover colonies that once they've gotten really high mite loads. So I guess that's my message, Grayson, is that know your mite counts and do something about it.
Oh, definitely. I think, testing is really important. And before I treat this year, because, I got to treat sometime this fall. Yeah, I'm going to have to do it, sometime in this August. I'm hoping to. But before that, I'm going to do some treating. I need to know where my number's at. So that's something that I've always thought about. And, it's easy just to go pull up a frame and say, oh, well, there's not many mites here. Let's just not worry about it. It's really easy to do that, and a lot of people do it. But it really is important to test, and I think I agree with you there. It's a really good, important thing there. And while we're, on this verite talk here real quick, we'll continue going. I was going to ask about treatment. So after a beekeeper, goes into their house, figures out their, load, and they decide to treat, what are some good options that you like to use and that you teach, at your beekeeping courses or, your classes that might be best for, some beekeepers to use? What's your advice for treatments?
Sure. Well, this is kind of coming back to knowing what your mite numbers are, right? Like if you're keeping track of it, I think it's helpful to choose a treatment that's appropriate for where your mites are, right? Because there's some that are a little bit more drastic than others, right? Some treatments are expensive. Some of them can be kind of hard on bees, right? Like, so you should kind of have an idea of where they're at. And then also some treatments can only be used at certain times of the year. So you have to kind of consider that. So it really is, it's a little bit like a chess game that you're playing with the mites that you got to figure out and kind of outsmart them to some level. So here's kind of some that I suggest. Now I'm going to say this knowing that you've got listeners, there's people tuning in from all over the world, and it's going to be different kind of depending on where you're at. And so, you can always just take this with a hefty grain of salt. But it's some of our research, what we've shown really conclusively is that you just get so much more bang for your buck when you are treating mites in the winter, or at times, not necessarily winter, like if you're up in Canada, like dead winter, I'm not saying that, but like when your bees don't have as much brood, right? When they're broodless or nearly broodless, like that's when you really want to be hitting them hard. And then as they're growing again, your bees are starting to pop in the spring, you hit them hard again, which is kind of seems counterintuitive. A lot of people are like, oh no, the springtime, that's when I'm going to make all my honey. I can't be putting treatments in there. Well, you really want to hit them before those big nectar flows. That's why it's important to know your nectar flows, because if you can knock them down, let's say, for us where we're at in Florida, let's say, by February, the bees are building back up, but by, late March, early April is when some of the major nectar flows are starting. So then, like, while they're building up in February, you got to be hitting them and trying to bring those mite levels down, because a lot of the treatments don't really work in the summertime or in the fall. For us, at least, our fall is very warm and very hot, and so it's not like necessarily a great time to be treating. So you asked about specific treatments. I'm not dodging the question, I swear. Some of the things that I have observed that has worked well are things like oxalic acid, amitraz in the form, like the legal form of Apgar can work well, but it doesn't always work well. Or like for that matter, oxalic acid doesn't always work well unless you do it at the right dose and enough times, right? Like, which if you have 1,000 colonies, that all of a sudden becomes really cumbersome and a little bit difficult. But if you got a few colonies in your yard, then it's a really accessible option. Formic acid can work really well under the right conditions, but that's a compound that's like really volatile and it will really knock back your bees. So you would have to follow the label pretty closely to hit it within the right temperature range. But usually for us in Florida, that means the right temperature range is usually that early spring or kind of around December, January, right? Like when it's not so cold, but it's not so hot. So you have to be careful. We're usually doing things like that in rotation. And this kind of brings back to my other point of why it's so important to like know what your mite loads are and to be sampling regularly, is because just because you spent a lot of money on a treatment doesn't actually mean it worked very well for you, right? So kind of doing it before and after is super important, so you know if it was worth it, right? Like if it worked for you. So something to keep in mind for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. Sometimes treatments, don't work, and I've had, I've heard a lot about that, and I've really listened to a lot of other beekeepers. There's a lot of other beekeeping chats, but I try to take in information and listen to it, and that's important too. And it really is important to be able to test before and after, or test, treat, and test. Test before, and if it's actually low and you don't need to treat, sometimes you don't have to treat. But if it's a little too high, treat. That's kind of the formation I've used. I've always keep it simple, but it's really important, I believe. So I agree with you. It's a really important topic, and sometimes, like you said earlier, you pick up a frame and you look at it and nothing's there, and then you're like, well, maybe it's all right. But then if you actually took a test, there could be 20 mites on there, and you might need to treat with something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
happened to me. I've fallen into that trap too, right? Like, I mean, I'll look at it and like, oh, good, I don't have any mites, and then I do the sample. I'm like, well, holy smokes, I got a ton of mites. So, just you got to be careful. Don't trust your eyes. And I've got good eyes, and I don't trust them for looking for mites.
Oh yeah, I get you. And I came up with a situation too. I used to be kind of like, I kind of avoided treatments. I never really treated, before. Now I do. But before that, I never treated. So, I kind of went into a hive, and I was looking in there, and I had a tester, but I never tested. So I decided, hey, let me test this out. It looks like there's no mites here, and it looked really good, no mites. But then when I took that test, there was like 20, 25 mites in there. It was terrible. So I was like, this ain't good. So that's kind of the part where I decided maybe I should look into some treatments and start treating. So then that's where I came into the spot where I will treat, but if it's within a certain threshold, I'll just save treatments, and I'll save it for later. If there's maybe a different time where the threshold's higher than it needs to be, I'll go on and treat. So that's kind of what I've done for a while, and this year I'm gonna go on and test before. I have 10 colonies. If you don't kind of what I have right now, I have 10 colonies, and I gotta test all. I'm gonna try to test as many as I can and treat all of them if they need to be. So we'll see how that goes. Here's one question I did want to ask you about. How many colonies do you have? Do you have colonies, or do you just mainly do research, or do you have some colonies of your own? So I'm still trying to get to know some of your stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I do have some colonies of my own, and I've also got the ones that we manage at work. So let me tell you about the ones at work, because that's probably what that's at least that's the important ones for most people. So right. So the ones at work are like we manage anywhere between like 200 to 300 bees and 200 to 300 colonies, and we have it just kind of depends on the research project, right? So we have lots of people that come and visit our lab, and they'll see the bees and they're like, wow, you know, you guys must make a ton of honey. And the answer is like, actually, we really don't. I mean, sometimes if it's a good flow, maybe we'll make some honey, but we manage these bees for research, not for honey, unless that's part of our research question. You know, it's not really something we're doing. And so like managing bees for research is really done in a very different way, because we're not necessarily building up the bees as strong as I possibly can. Like, you know, I have to have pests and pathogens and stuff like that, right? I have to have sick bees in order to study them. So a lot of our colonies, we have these lots of colonies, but a lot of them are not in like amazing shape. But again, it depends on our question, because sometimes we do need colonies that are in like prime condition, and so we have to manage them really, really well. And so it all just kind of depends. So at work, we manage lots of bees. At home, I do want some bees because I love beekeeping, and I want my kids to be, you know, around it, and we like making a little bit of honey. But I also don't have a ton of property or a ton of time, so I keep 2 bees at home, 2 colonies at home, and just enough to keep me busy and playing around. But you know, I do try to manage those bees well, because the ones it's like I have to like prove to myself, like, yeah, I do know what I'm talking about. Like a beekeeper can come into like my work colonies and be like, well, these look really rough. But like, no, come see the ones at my house. I promise they look good. So anyways, just a couple at my house to play around with, and then a lot more to manage for research.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You know, around here, I don't have, you know, a lot. You know, I actually started off the year with 1 colony.
Oh, yeah.
Last year, many people do know this, you know, but I will say this, you know, for you, you know, if you kind of want to know some of what happened with me, you know, past couple of years, you might have experienced the same thing. Last year, as many people know, we had a really bad, you know, flow. So last year we had a really rough year with my apiary. So, like, you know, we got up to like maybe 17 colonies or something last year. So we got good numbers last year, but then they all went down so fast, you know, faster than I could blink. And then all of a sudden, I was in winter. I had 6 colonies, maybe 7, although most of them didn't make it. And then I came out with 1. So this year I'm telling myself I'm about to start doing a much better job than I did last year, because last year I really did a bad job. I did a lot of, you know, I probably did too much splits, because that's really how I got my numbers up in the first place.
Yeah, sure.
Then we didn't have anything for the bees to go out and get, so that really hurt them too. If we had a good flow, maybe they could have done well. I don't know, but I think I probably did 2 small splits. So this year we didn't. Yeah, this year we didn't do that. This year I'm doing good so far. So, you know, we're doing better this year. And, you know, we had the bad flow last year. We didn't get any honey last year. This year has been a very promising year so far. We've got some honey. It's been a really crazy year so far. You know, I had I had 2 colonies swarm on me. Both of them I was able to get back. One didn't go high. I had to cut the limb down and suck it up with my BVAC. The other one went way too high, and I have a video on it. It's really, I really didn't believe it, but it went really high. I couldn't get it, so it's basically lost cause. So then they stayed there 2 weeks. It took them a while to leave, and then they finally left. And then I ended up finding them on the bottom of my hive. Never one of my hives, but I had bees in it, so I had to go and suck them up, and I was able to get them back. And you know, it's just, you know, crazy year this year. It's been so much better, and I had like 3 other colonies that made swarm cells. So this year's been really good. We've been having some strong bees. So, but I've just been kind of playing around. I don't have many, you know. May try to get up maybe next year, try to even get up bigger, maybe get a better harvest and explore some other things and have more things. But this year's really just been a rebuild year with 1 colony. So, you know, that colony that I had started of the year is still here today. So, you know, they're doing good too. So, I mean, you know, just, yeah.
Great.
Let's see. I think we got a question here real quick. Mary Wickenheiser from Michigan asks, has the veromite changed at all in the last number of years?
Yeah, great question, Mary. So the answer to that is yes, it has. So you can know that has changed a bit based on what we can use to kill it. So it's actually changed quite a bit since it's been in the United States. At first, when it got to the United States, Varroa was pretty much susceptible to a whole bunch of different chemicals. And then once we all used the same thing, which at the time was called a product called Apistan, the active ingredient is called tau-fluvalinate. Everybody was using it. All, everybody. It was cheap. It was more affordable than other things, but it was really the only one registered for use at the time. And so because of that, everyone's overusing it. The mites changed because this is kind of where natural selection and selective pressures and evolution kind of comes into it, right? Is like when you're killing off all the mites that are susceptible to that, there's a small fraction of them that have the genetic makeup necessary that like makes them, resistant to that chemical, and then they're the only ones breeding. So then now you've got all these mites that are not affected by that. So we jump to the next chemical. The second product that was really used heavily by beekeepers was a product called Checkmite, and the active ingredient is called Coumaphos. But same thing is like very quickly for that one, it killed a bunch of mites, but then there was a pretty decent level of them that were resistant to that ingredient, and so then now they're resistant. And now we're seeing this now in the last few years with Amatraz, right? You've got mites that are more and more are becoming resistant to Apgar strips, which is the legal treatment, or a lot of other commercial beekeepers are getting Amatraz through different ways. But regardless, if it's the same active ingredient, then it's still causing that selective pressure. And so you've got mites that are changing. So whether they're changing morphologically, like they're based on their size or their physical behaviors or whatever, like that so much, I don't know, or at least I'm not an expert enough to speak on that. But genetically, yeah, they're changing, and that's what's making it harder for us to kill them.
Yeah, definitely. Richard has a question, and yes, are there any continents that are mite free?
Any continents that are mite free? There sure is. There is one continent that is mite free, and that continent is called Antarctica. So no bees, no mites, and everywhere else it's there. Australia gave us the most hope for such a long time, but it is now there and present, and so now those beekeepers are figuring out their brave new world of how to control that. I've been in a lot of meetings, a lot of workshops, trying to talk with Australian beekeepers and help them kind of navigate this, because it's going to change everything. Yeah, so we're praying for our Australian beekeeper friends there.
Yeah. I've heard a little bit about that too. They've been doing a pretty good job. We had a little hope for them, but then they it eventually got over there, as I'm sure it finally would, and it did. And hopefully everything goes okay for them. Down here in Alabama and all around the United States, we've kind of adapted to the varroa mite, but it still causes problems. They still cause dead outs, and bees die because of them. So so it's not like completely free down here, but we've kind of got used to them a little bit. But
yeah, we've had to manage it appropriately because of that.
Right.
They're going to have to start doing the same now.
That's right, because down here, I've had a lot of my hives. I'm sure that I've lost is because of varroa mites. So this year I got to make sure varroa mites are down for our bees to be able to come through winter. Pretty good, because if our levels get too high, then the numbers start going down and down and down, and those mite numbers keep going up, and that's just a scary thought to think about, but it happens. And I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen for me this year, because we wouldn't, nobody really wants that, so we got to treat this year and make sure we don't have any mites, at least a good threshold is what I'm hoping. Let's see. We got another question here. Red Beard House, aka Tim Sanders, is is it becoming better to have a year or two off of treatments?
So, good question. So whether it's, I don't know that you need a year or two off of treatments entirely, no, but like, you mean from like a specific treatment, like you go a couple of years without using amatraz. I think having a break in between them and rotating your chemicals is crucial. You have to take a break. If we're all using the same thing, this is like kind of what's getting us into this mess, right? Is if we're not rotating those treatments. And the problem is that some treatments are more effective than others, and that's why we kind of get hooked on it. And so you kind of have to be willing to use a chemical or a product that maybe is not quite as efficacious, but it's going to help you like keep those resistant populations from forming. So to answer your question, I'm not sure you should take a year. I wouldn't take a year off of treatment. I maybe would take a year off of amatraz or something like that, right? A lot of the synthetic chemicals that would be like products like Apistan, Checkmite, and Apgar, those are products that tend to stick around and hang around for a while. They in the past, anyways, before really resistance mites, those are the ones that were like most effective. But they tend to stick around and hang around in the wax, versus some of them that are more water soluble, like oxalic acid, formic acid, thiamol, right? Those products really like either evaporate or break down very quickly inside the hive. And so those ones don't tend to be as effective because it's kind of like an immediate hit and then it's gone. But that in some ways is actually a good thing, that resistance is not really forming with that, but it does require more frequent applications, right? So those ones, I guess I'm telling you all of that to say some of those chemicals that are more of like the natural, they're the non-synthetic ones, they would probably be okay to use every year, like in rotation with other things. Some of the other ones like Apistan and Apgar, you could probably use maybe once a year and switch off when you need it, and be willing to do that.
Yeah, definitely. See, you got another question here from Gunline Bees, Tim and Hannah, and they ask, Cameron, is there any research in eliminating hive beetles? Not speaking of good treatment for larvae, but something to actually kill the adult beetles within the hive.
Sure. Yeah, I'll answer that question. I also want to say, Grayson, there was one from Jessica that's up top that we'll get to in a second. But let me ask. I'm going to answer this one because it's already up on the screen here. So gunline. So it's a really good question. It's actually something our lab is working on, because to this point, it's been pretty difficult to find something that is not incredibly toxic. Like we can find things that are toxic to the beetles. That's not the problem. It's a problem to find something that's toxic to the beetles, but not so toxic to the bees themselves, right? That's really where the rub is. So for now, so the research is there. There are some things that we think are actually some promising hits, but whether or not we can turn that into a useful product is still kind of yet to be seen. It's coming though. I do actually feel hopeful with that, and there are people that are definitely working on that right now. Probably the best thing you could do is trapping, which I know as soon as I say that, a lot of you are rolling your eyes, and because it doesn't work that well, and mostly it doesn't work incredibly well, but there's not really effective, safe chemical treatments at the moment for small hive beetles, but definitely an area that we're still working on.
Yeah, definitely. Down here we have
Beetle galore.
Beetles, definitely. Yeah. They're they can get pretty annoying down here. But I will say, last year was the year that was really bad for beetles. I couldn't believe it. How bad it was. We had a very bad problem last year. I think it was because of our bad flow last year. I don't know if you had a bad flow last year. I think most people did. I know we did. And last year we had a bad problem with beetles, but this year it hasn't been as bad. But I have seen them around, and actually I've actually saw beetles during winter last year. When all winter long, I saw beetles. They've been hanging out in the colony, a lot of them. So last year we had a big problem. Let's see up here, Jessica Fairfax. Let's see. Tested my hives 1.5%, 2% mite load, caging my queen, and going to try some OA vape this year. All good. Hope all goes well.
Oh, okay. I guess that wasn't a question, but I'm just gonna say, but good, Jessica. I'm glad that you checked. You know what your mite numbers are. You got a plan on what you're going to do. I think that's great. Sorry, I kind of saw it out of the corner of my eye.
Yeah,
thought it was quick,
definitely.
but still, good for you, Jessica.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Keep my fingers crossed too.
Yeah, definitely. I've never, used OA. I've thought about trying some oxalic acid, but down here, oxalic acid, I think it would work. We'd have to do it during winter. Now, while we're talking about oxalic acid, I know we already talked about treatments, but I know you kind of know a little bit about oxalic acid. I've kind of watched your stuff before. I know you talk a little bit about oxalic acid. So tell me a little bit about oxalic acid, because I'm not an expert on it. I don't know much about it. What are some things that if I ever wanted to try to treat my bees with OA, oxalic acid at some point, what are some things that I might want to know, and other people who never treat with it might want to know? What's some?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's we're calling it the active ingredient because we talk about oxalic acid there for a long time. It was registered as like an emergency use permit. So the USDA said, or the EPA was like, okay, you can use oxalic acid. And they said that in 2015, and they kind of gave us their label, but I've learned a lot in the last few years of how the government works and what they like and dislike. And I'll tell you what they very much dislike is they don't want to be liable for anything. So they were basically like waiting for somebody to make a product, even though it's the active ingredient is just oxalic acid. They want somebody to hold the registration on that product. So apabioxal was the first one. They sell you just oxalic acid. That's all it is. But the product is called apabioxal. And there are 3 legal ways to apply it, right? You can mix it up into a solution and dribble it onto the bodies of the bees. That can be pretty effective. You can vaporize it, which means you're heating it up and basically turning it into a gas and fumigating inside of the hive. And then if you're making packages, you can also spray packages. So those are the 3 ways that you can legally apply it. Now, apabioxal was the first one to get that registration. There's been another registration and new product in the United States. It's called EasyOx. These are you can get them in powder, or you can get them in like the like they're pressed into tablets, and so they're already pre-weighed. You just throw in, like, if you're going to use, if you're going to like vaporize with like 2 grams or something, you throw in two tablets and then off you go. So it's really convenient for that. And then soon the registration is complete, but not necessarily in all the states. And so this is a change that's coming very soon. Is there's a 3rd oxalic acid product that's coming to market soon. It's called Viroxan, and it's basically like cardboard soaked with OA and then whatever other inert products are in there. And so you're putting these strips inside the hive, and it's kind of more of a long lasting treatment, something like Apgar would be, but for oxalic acid. So I guess what you need to know, it's one of those things, like if you're just dribbling it or vaporizing it, I have found it to be very effective, but you would have to do it at a dose that's a little bit higher. Actually, 2 grams, like with the EasyOx, their label actually will allow you to use 2 grams. And if you're treating a single deep, or that's enough. Like it's usually enough to do some damage and kill some mites. We found that a little bit higher is better, but it's not what the label says yet. So so we'll see. Hopefully that maybe that change will come along the line in the future. But the people that have tested Viroxan, for the most part that I've heard, have had some good success with it too. So that's encouraging. It's nice for us to have some options, right? So that we can rotate. Now, I don't think you should. This is an important point, just in case anybody's wondering. I'm not saying you should rotate where one time you do oxalic acid dribble and then a few weeks later you do OA vaporization, and then a few weeks later you use Viroxan, because that doesn't actually count as rotation, right? It's the same active ingredient that you're using. When we talk about rotating those chemicals, I mean actually choosing different active ingredients. It's just a point that I want to break up or say out loud so that people people understand what I mean by that.
Definitely, that's important. And like you said, same in active ingredients. So it's not going to make much of a difference because it's the same active ingredient. But it's always important to start rotating. Too. I've used Apgar before, and I got to look on some different stuff. For my areas. Got to do more research because I've really only used Apgar. I need to use some other stuff this year because I really kind of want to start, rotating. That's something that I've always been kind of wanting to do. Some of the chemicals. I don't want to keep on using Apgar in my colonies because that's kind of honestly all I've used. I put a little bit of Apgar in some of my colonies, but I really didn't use it much. I need to get more of that. It's probably what I'll treat with next. I've heard a lot about Formic Pro and all these other treatments and oxalic acid. There's couple times where I've thought about getting oxalic acid, the vaporizer, but I never got around to doing that. But
well, you don't have to do the vaporizer either. I mean, I like the vapor treatment. I find that it's quick, it's effective. However, the using the dribble method can also be effective. The thing that people just need to realize is that it's a flash treatment. It means it's going to hit once and then it's going to dissipate very quickly. And so that doesn't kill all your mites. You're going to have to go in like every 5 to 7 days for maybe 3 to 4 applications, right? You need to have multiple applications. That's why maybe on a commercial level, it's a little bit harder to do that. Some commercial beekeepers are doing it because, they don't have a lot of options right now, but it does work. You just gotta give it some multiple applications.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's see. JW asks, Cameron, what are your thoughts on using Apgar as a knockdown treatment?
Yeah, so I think it can work really well. So for those of you that aren't that don't know about this, like Apgar is a thymol based treatment. It's very volatile. And it's one of those that you really want to follow that label on because if it is too hot outside, right, and you stick some Apgar in your colonies, your bees are going to let you know that they're not super happy with it, right? I've seen them just straight up like get out the hive and leave when it's just too hot. So it's one of those where you want to follow the label and use it within the right temperature range. But yeah, we've definitely had good success with this, especially earlier on, I talked about hitting it at the right time of year and using those treatments at the right, like timing them well. In the early spring, we've had great success with it and really helped clean up a lot of our colonies with Apgar. It's just, it's not something I would use I have a pretty limited window where I'm at in Florida, right? Where it's just miserably hot for 9 months out of the year. And then it's just pretty hot for 2 months of the year. So then we have one month that's very comfortable for me. But the rest of the time is very hot. So it's about using it appropriately, but I think it's an effective treatment when used right.
Oh yeah, definitely. Good question there, and I agree with you. Let's see. If you guys want to ask any more questions, please do leave them in there. We've already gone like 40 minutes. It's really unbelievable how fast these things go. So we got another 20 minutes. We'll take a couple more questions, and kind of want to talk about a different something different, a different topic real quick. Since I know you do a lot about varroa mice and stuff, things that can harm bees. Do you guys at Florida, down there, do y'all study anything about American foulbrood, or some of those foulbrood, and have y'all done any research on that? And if you have, what's some things that you might want to share?
Sure. Well, so foulbrood is one that I'll just say it, like European foulbrood, I think is actually a much bigger problem and is much more prevalent than most people give it credit for. If they see some things that's going on in their hive and they're just like, what is this? This is like some kind of crud. This is something that's not good. And basically every time we like have like a mystery infection where people are like, oh, what's going on? It very often comes back as European foulbrood. So like it's one of those things where it's prevalent. It's around a lot. The good news for European foulbrood is that antibiotics can clear it up, right? Like, so if you might, depending on where you're at, right? Like you're probably going to have to get a veterinary prescription for that. And it's different kind of in different states on how that's achieved. But there's kind of some hope for that, and using some good hygienic practices when you're moving from colony to colony can really help clear it up when it's got something bad. So now American foulbrood's a whole other story, right? It's kind of a death sentence. You could put antibiotics on a colony that's infected with American foulbrood, and it's going to kill the vegetative state of that bacteria. But it's not going, so it'll look like it'll clear it up, but it'll just keep getting reinfected because those spores that bacteria leave behind are almost indestructible, right? There's really not much you can do. And that's why the recommendation is to, meet with your state inspector, have somebody else look at it, like an authority look at it. But then if it's positive, you're going to burn that hive and the equipment, because you just don't want it spreading all over the place. So to answer your question is like, what kind of research are we doing related to foulbrood? Well, at the moment, not much. But American foulbrood's actually kind of hard to study because we can't really have yards of infected bees. I remember I said, like, we manage our bees for research, and so I have to manage a lot of sick bees, which is true. I don't know that I kind of have some diplomatic immunity when it comes to some of like the treatments and things like that from the state, because I'm a research institution, but I don't really have that kind of immunity for like American foulbrood. I couldn't just keep 200 really sick American foulbrood colonies, because then that could just get everybody sick and spread it like crazy. Right. So it's a little harder to study that. And there's also, until you can find a way that would kill the spores without necessarily like killing the bees or shaking them all out, and then it's almost like we're just playing the prevention game really with American foulbrood. So European foulbrood, on the other hand, there's a little bit more study into that, but right now it's like we got antibiotics. Some people treat prophylactically, which means they're treating all the time, maybe like a couple times, like once in the spring, once in the fall, trying to like just make sure that their bees don't get it. There's a decent argument for not doing that, right? Because you don't want to just select for bacteria that is antibiotic resistant, just like we would with varroa if we keep using the same thing over and over. So, certainly some considerations to make there, but yeah, the foulbroods can be a problem. One thing, you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to tell you anyways. One of the things that we are studying, or we're starting to like really get into and looking at more pathogens right now. I have a master's student named Julia Saint-Amant, who's really fantastic. And one of the things that she's doing is in collaboration with beekeepers all over the state of Florida. They're sending her samples every week, every month. And she has got this huge mountain of samples now that she's going through and looking for a new, not a new pathogen, but it's a pathogen that a lot of people don't know about or don't look into very much, but it's an amoeba. and it's another protozoa that gets into bee guts, and it basically clogs up. They create cysts into their Malpighian tubules, which are kind of like the kidneys of for the bees. They kind of filter their hemolymph for their blood, and so it can cause some pretty big problems there. We're about to start some chalk brood research because we got a grant to look into some possible treatments, because there's not really any treatments available for chalk brood, but sometimes chalk brood can get really bad and nasty. So we are doing certainly some pathogen work. We're doing a Nosema product test basically right now. And so we're doing a lot with pathogens, just not the foul broods yet.
Yeah, I get you. All right, I think we got another question here. Goes back to some treatments and stuff. And JW asks, also, can you discuss your thoughts on Formic Pro?
Sure. Yeah, JW, happy to. So Formic Pro, the active ingredient is formic acid, just like you might think. And Formic Pro is it can work really well. In fact, I think formic acid is one of the most effective mite treatments that we have. I mean, it's a solid mite killer. Now the problem is it can also be a solid bee killer or larva killer, because it's just like Apgar. It's really volatile. And so, once you crack the lid on your first, package of like formic acid or something, like you take a big whiff of that, like you will remember that. Like it's intense. Whereas like Apgar, like thymol kind of smells like menthol, so it kind of smells like Vicks Vapor Rub, and it's kind of pleasant. Like not formic acid. It is not pleasant. But it is it can be really effective. Formic Pro kind of gets a little bit of a bad rap sometimes because people say how it can harm queens and do some damage. And there's a lot of evidence to say, yeah, it can kind of stop some queens and cause those colonies to abort their queen or to supersede. And so it's a consideration to have. I haven't really observed that much as long as I'm doing it at kind of the right time. But some beekeepers swear that they're doing it everything the right way, and they lose some queens. And so it might be something that you time. I know a beekeeper that loves Formic Pro, and he specifically treats at a time of year where he's probably going to requeen within a few weeks anyways. So it knocks down all the mites. If it kills some queens, it's not a big deal. He's going to throw some new queens in there soon. So it could be a strategy that works for you. But I personally, I haven't really seen it affect my queens like that. So yeah, I'm not too worried about it.
I get you. I've heard a lot about that stuff as well. And, killing queens and stuff. And I've watched videos as well. And, we have a guy down here, not too far away from me, Bruce, from down there in Dauphin. I think, I think you were on the stream team. I think he's on.
Yeah, I know Bruce. Yeah,
I think I've had him on here like 3 times. So we're not too far away from each other. So we're like an hour away. So, he tried Formic Pro. I can't remember the whole video. It's like a big video a while back, but down south, there's a lot of speculation if the heat, down here, would be a problem. And, like you said, you got to follow the direction. So that's, you have to have the perfect temperatures. Because down here, and I'm sure down there in Florida too, it can get really, really hot. And, it's still hot now, but the moisture isn't as high as it has been, during July. So it's doing okay. But we've been pretty hot. We've actually already started feeding, kind of prepping up for winter, because we'll be there before we know it, because we actually scheduled this live stream like in February, and we had like 6 months or 5 months away from it, so I was like, it's gonna be a while before it gets here, and here we are. It passed by so quickly, so that tells me I better get started on prepping up for winter, because it'll be here before we know it. So we're in that time again, so we're already starting to feed, and I'm sure we do I've been kind of doing a little bit what Bob Benny does, feed a little bit early, but we've just been kind of prepping up for winter. We've got to do treatments. I got to figure out what treatment I'm going to be doing down here. I got to figure out which one probably suit me best. Because I've used Apgar before. I guess it did okay, but I can't keep on feeding the same thing, the same chemical as we've been talking about tonight, because the more I do that, of course, the more it probably won't work. So I gotta do some testing here soon in the next couple weeks, and then I'm treating the ones that need it, and then we'll be good on that. And then all I have to do is feed and kind of build all the colonies up, and we'll be kind of near winter, I guess. Then we'll have to overwinter, and then we get the next season. So
Yeah, it'll be here soon. You gotta start thinking about it for sure.
right, definitely. That's just what we've been doing down here. Feeding and getting ready to treat. Since down here, there's a lot of multiple options. Formic Pro and some of the other all the multiple treatments. I just gotta figure out which one will be good, because we still have hot temperatures down here. Even though we're getting into a different month, we still have hot temperatures. During August, and most people down here do. So I gotta figure out the right treatment that probably do good. That'll probably do good. Too. So
yeah,
that's thing. We kind of got to figure out. And
sure. Well, I saw that Richard put in the chat about drone frames and the queen cage for drone frames, and so I just thought I could talk on that a little bit, because I think it's a great suggestion, Richard. I think so. For those that may not know, like a drone, what Richard's talking about is like a drone comb foundation, right? So what's going to happen is the bees draw out. That's the foundation is a little bit wider. So as the bees like start drawing out the wax, it's going to become drone comb. So that the idea is that you've got to really, if you've got the queen cage too, from Better Bee or something, that's even better. You got a queen in there that's going to stay in that area for a while. Hopefully, kind of encourage her to lay a uniform pattern. If it's one of those things that if everything works out well and your bees want to do it, they're going to do it, and it can work really well. There's some research about 20 years ago now, but showed that they can remove 95% of their mites in one kind of go around, like of having a well-placed drone comb frame that like was open to lots of drones. And so the idea here is that the mites are more attracted to drone brood because they reproduce inside the brood cells, right? And worker brood, they'll get in there all day, but if there's drones present, the drones have a little bit longer of a developmental time, and so there's more opportunity for them to reproduce and be more biologically successful with drones. So the idea that you're basically trapping drones. You're waiting till those bees, they start rearing out, they've got all this larva, and you're just hoping that all of these mites are collecting inside of that cell. And once everything is all capped, you remove that whole frame. You put it into, a freezer or feed it to your chickens or whatever you want to do. But the idea is that you're just taking out a huge chunk of mites, and it can work incredibly well. So, but the problem is that, from my experience, is that I can't always convince my bees that they want to do this, right? Like if they don't want to make drones, if it's not the season for it, like if they don't want to make drones, then I can put the queen in there and she can even lay, but the bees will just abort all the brood. So it's one of those things where you're hoping it works out well, but especially in the spring and kind of later on in the late summer, when sometimes they make like another resurgence of drones and try to get any more mating done, it can be really effective. Once you get into the fall, probably not so much, but yeah, give it a shot. If you've never done that before, it can be a really nice non-chemical treatment.
I do have drone comb. I actually have 5 of them, so
cool.
And I've used them before. I gotta I gotta go to that. I've talked about that before. I have multiple videos. I have one talking about something like that, but I gotta use those too. And I also wanted to go to one thing real quick. In a second, we'll kind of start wrapping things up since we're almost already within an hour. But I kind of wanted to talk about another, non-chemical way, I've saw from a lot of different beekeepers is, putting, queen in the cage and keeping her, isolating her for, like a week or something. I forgot the exact day and I forgot what it was. It's just something that I know, but keep her in there for 7 days, and that kind of disrupts the cycle for the mites. I was wondering if you ever heard of that before, and if you have, I can't remember the method. Somebody might be able to tell me. I can't really remember exactly what it is. I just remember that if you kind of know, if you've heard of it, what are some of your thoughts on it? Does it, is it effective?
Yeah, so I've definitely heard of it. I did even a research project on that a number of years ago during my PhD, where we were you're caging the queen, and you can cage the queen for as long as you want, really, but you know that your bees do need to have constant laying. If they're not going to survive for very long if you cage the queen for too long. Because when I was doing it, we were caging the queen for 24 days. Now, 24 days it's a long time to keep your queen caged, but the idea was that we would cause a total brood break. So from the time that a queen lays an unfertilized egg that's going to develop into a drone, and by the time it actually matures enough and hatches out as an adult drone, is 24 days. So if you cage your queen for that period of time, you would have 0 brood for that period of time. And then the idea is that you'd probably want to come in and double it up with something like treat with a chemical or something and knock down all those mites all at once. Now there's some people that, like you mentioned, Grayson, that like maybe if you just cage your queen for like a week or something, you're causing like a disruption and slowing down the mite reproduction, which is true. If there's a break in that brood cycle, it does slow down the mite reproduction. But I have never seen anybody give any like good evidence, nor in my personal studies with it have we seen any real evidence to show that alone will do really anything. Because the mites, they're good at hanging on, right? Like, I mean, think about it, like in really cold climates, like something like Canada, right? Like they might have like 7 months of winter and there's still mites coming out in the spring because they haven't been reproducing for 7 months, but they're hanging on, right? So just because you cause that disruption, yeah, it'll kind of keep varroa numbers from increasing, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to kill them. You might get lucky and some mites are going to fall off as the bees groom them, but that in itself is usually not enough. You're going to have to like pair that with some other kind of treatment, usually a chemical treatment.
Yeah, definitely. I think we got 2 more questions here real quick. Gun on Bees says, Cameron, what are the harmful effects of, or if any, with solar farms and bees? Word on the street, there's one going across the road from us.
Yeah, good question. So as far as the harmful effects that's going to have on your bees, I'm not sure that the solarness will have really any effect. I think what would potentially have the effect of harming your bees is the fact that it's just taking up pasture land or something, right? Like it's going to prevent there from being more flowers, blooming plants and nectar pollen resources. That's what's going to really be the problem, because they're going to keep mowing, they're going to keep the grass low and keep things from growing. They'll probably be spraying lots of herbicides and stuff like around underneath those solar panels, because they don't want stuff growing up and covering it at all. So yeah, I don't know that the solar themselves, the panels themselves, will do anything, but I think it's just the management and losing that land that is potentially going to make it a not such a good spot for having your bees there, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I thought we had another question, but it isn't a question, but I'll still pop it up because it has that Cameron on there. It says that, Cameron, I'm in Southern Illinois. We have been fortunate to have some good temps for final and formic treatments. Been testing all hives less than 3%.
All right, good job. Way to go, JW. I'd say, it's good. Like I said before, it's so much better to keep your mites low than it is to try to recover them. Because like when you're at 3%, that's already, you're kind of at the danger zone, because then you wait one more month and then like, bam, they could be up at a 6, and then you wait 6 weeks and now they're nearing 10 mites per 100 feet, right? Like it can really get out of control fast. So So I think it's worth trying your best to like keep them low, kind of obviously like sub 3 mites per 100 bees, but it sounds like you're doing that. So kudos to you, JW.
Definitely. Well, we are at 1 hour so far, so I guess we'll go on and wrap this up. Thank you, Cameron, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And I think we're able to get everybody's questions in and answered, and we had a really good chat. And I learned some stuff. I think a lot of other people did too. So we really appreciate you sharing your time with us, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Grayson. I appreciate the invite, and good luck to everybody. Happy beekeeping.
Definitely. Good luck to you, and everybody have a good night.
Take care.